Professor Emily Shuckburgh is with us, Director of Cambridge Zero, Cambridge University Climate Initiative. Fiona and Kendall coming up, and Jason in Glasgow as well. We're talking about Planet Trump. It's very interesting, this, Emily. I hope you're enjoying it, because people always get quite feisty.
I know. And you know what? I think actually Peter just talked about power to the people being important. Yeah. I think that, actually this conversation we've been having this morning is so important because it is about power to the people. It's about getting everyone's ideas and thoughts as to what kind of future we want and how we come together to do it. And that's the conversation that we need to be having to ensure that we are developing a future that is going to work for all of us.
Fiona and Jason. Jason, you go first. Good morning. We've got David in Newport lining up. This is wonderful. Yeah, Jason, what would you be thinking then?
Your caller there, the Scottish woman there, she's going on about how great it is, all these wind turbines. Well, I disagree. They blight the area, okay? And there's no such thing as cheap electricity because we've got that many of them. Where's all this cheap electricity, okay? Now, the other thing as well, as you know in Scotland, what happens when there's no wind and there's no sun, okay? Because I know for a fact that we have big, massive, big diesel generators as backups when there is no wind and there is no sun, okay? The other thing as well, when you're going on about China being this, so polluting and everything else, they've actually got more solar panels than the whole of the UK put together. And that will never change. So I don't know where, you keep going on about China polluting. It is a polluting country, but they're basically doing more than the UK for solar panels. Because, let's face it, in the UK, you talk about electric cars. If everybody changed to electric cars, we don't have enough power in the grid. Grid that we have in the
Okay, what about Planet Trump? I hear these arguments. What about Planet Trump? How much of it?
I was glad that he got in. He's looking after his own country. And if he wants to drill more oil, it brings the prices down because there's plenty of people that are struggling to heat themselves and they're choosing to heat or eat. And with the government, with their budget, they've made everybody poorer. You can say everyone has their opinions, but, with the VAT bills, the national insurance, for instance, that's crippling a lot of companies, putting down the threshold. It's bad enough the way it is when the government promised they wouldn't put up the taxes, which they basically, that's what they've done. They've crippled businesses. So for Trump-wise, I'm so glad that he's got in because at the end of the day, he's going to look after his own country. And if it means drilling more oil, it means that everybody gets cheaper fuel bills.
Fiona and Kendall, everybody benefits.
Oh, my God. I'm just listening to your show, Nicky. And I've been on your show before and I've listened to your show before. And do you not hear these familiar arguments coming out every time? And people talking about opinions. We are facing the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced. The nearest thing I can compare it to psychologically is like the 1930s, watching Hitler come to power, except this is across the whole world.
1% right? is all we would do if we did all carbon neutral. That's it, 1%. We wouldn't make a difference in this country if we were all carbon neutral. You're bringing it out of, as if we're the polluting country.
I haven't said anything about the UK. Can I finish my point, please? I haven't said anything about the UK. This is a worldwide problem. It is not just the UK. It's not just America, even though they are responsible for 13% of the world's emissions. This is a threat to all of us. We're akin to the dinosaurs who are, with a comet coming at them that's going to wipe them out, except we know the comet is coming because we can see what's happened in Spain. Those people in Spain were having these sort of conversations a few days before all that happened, before there were purple crosses on cars marking where people had died trying to get their cars to higher ground. And the only way out of this is for us to come together as a world, for countries to sign a non-proliferation fossil fuel treaty and we all have to
That will never happen. That will never happen.
unless that happens.
When do you think that's going to happen? When do you think China's just going to go, do you know what? We're going to stop doing coal. Do you know what, in America? Or we're just going to stop pumping oil?
China, like us, are facing massive food shortages all over the world.
China's got more solar panels than the whole of the UK put together.
I'm not here talking about China. I'm talking about the whole world.
But you've just said China. I'm basically saying the solar panels.
China, like us, like every single country in the world, is facing massive food shortages. Farmers are giving up everywhere. We've just had the wettest, warmest winter that we've ever had. Farmers are in despair. They kept trying to plant again, and the plants, they can't plant food. Without food, we are facing societal unrest, because that's what happens when people get hungry.
You better speak to the government when the farmers in this UK will be out of business because what the government did in the budget. You know, I think that's more of a sort of distraction.
The reason we're going round and round these arguments, which I know Nicky has heard before, is because we don't have a shared perception of the threat that we're facing. The science is not being shared with the people. The weather, the extreme weather events which are happening simultaneously across the world and impacting loads of communities, just like it impacted the Spanish, that is not being reported. What we need is a worldwide debate in every country, and we have to put this on a war footing in every country, and we have to get out of using oil
That's never
and gas
going to happen.
and coal.
You know it, and I know it. That is never going to happen. You're never going to stop the oil being pumped.
In that case, we are the dinosaurs who are watching that comet coming for us.
Nicky, could you possibly tell me something here? Was there not some guy that discovered a society, a whole underground, what was it, an underground city? Was it underneath Spain or something? That basically they all left because of climate. They all left because of climate.
This is whataboutery. We can see what's happening. There's a beautiful town in Canada called Jasper, where somebody I know used to visit. It's beautiful. And half of it was burnt down this year.
So if you're worried about the landscape, what are you saying to the farmers in England that are getting the pylons that are getting built, that are getting forcibly built?
Both of you, hang on a second. Emily Shuckburgh, without panicking people, Professor, what happened in Valencia, could it happen in the next few years in Kettering?
Well, we've seen, haven't we, in the past in the UK where we have seen severe flooding events, and I know how devastating that is to those communities that have been affected by those floods. If you think back a few years ago, there was those images in different parts of the country of houses and offices underwater. So, of course, those extreme weather events are going to be coming to us in the UK as well. And we've seen temperatures in the summer exceed 40 degrees Celsius the other summer. Now, that was beyond level at which it was particularly pleasant. But more importantly, we saw that particularly elderly people really, really suffer from those extreme high temperatures. And very sadly, we saw elderly people die as a consequence of those extreme temperatures.
So you're saying quite clearly, it's not about where they are in the world's meteorological ecosystem and how they get El Nino and how the currents and the tides and the winds and the stars and the moon affects them. It could happen, the Gulf Stream or whatever. It could happen here. Just what we saw there.
But also the other thing that's important to remember is that things that happen elsewhere in the world also affect us. So, people have talked about us getting products from all over the world. We also get our food from all over the world. So where there's severe climate change that happens elsewhere in the world affects crop growth, affects supply chains, then it also affects us. So it's not as though we're only exposed to things that happen within the bounds of our borders.
See, we're not just talking, Jason. We're not just talking, Jason. I don't want to say that again. again, but we're not just talking, Jason, about, look at those lovely vineyards in Inverness. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about what we just heard there. David in Newport, Justin in Cardiff. Woof. Justin, good morning. What is your point?
Hi there. Well, the problems of tackling climate change are absolutely enormous, and nobody can deny that. But also the science behind it is undeniable. And 25 years ago, last century, I had to produce a report about environmental change, and in fact it was to do with the transport system, and in it I included the words, if we don't address climate change, within 100 years the centre of Cardiff will be under 10 feet of water. Now that is undeniably true if we continue on the present course. And a senior civil servant came up to me and he said, Justin, you cannot put this in a report like this. And I said, why not? It's true. And he said, we mustn't frighten the children. That's what he said. That's what a senior civil service said, the government's attitude at the time. And it really hasn't changed.
Well, that's what those two weather people, meteorologists, said to me. Did you hear when I was talking about that a little bit earlier?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't hear the earlier part. But
they said they're withholding the full, impactful truth of it from us because they want to give us hope and they want to make us think we can do something.
Yeah, well, yes, and we can do something, but for that almost to be government policy in those words, I find. And it evidently still is. Another fact is that we talk about greening electricity generation, but electricity generation is only about a third of our total power consumption. And in fact, in the last 5 years, our dependence on carbon in the total economy has actually gone up rather than gone down because we've closed a number of nuclear power stations. We're just being completely misled as to the scale of the problem and the progress we're making in tackling it.
The problem is, of course, with politicians, it's instant popularity gratification and not seeing beyond the horizon.
Of course. And that's why I really do feel for our great-grandchildren, because if Planet Trump actually happens, then what will happen will be the American economy, which is still about 20% of the total world's economy, will become entirely dependent on cheap carbon. And even if a new government gets in 4 or 5 years' time, they will be faced with being unable to turn the thing around because the American public simply will not accept it.
Okay.
And also, if America is doing it, why should India not do it?
Well, listen, that's quite a fact, quite an anecdote you come up with there. All too frighteningly, chillingly believable. Can I just say we're going to look at the big science of all this and the future on Monday, which sees the start of COP29. We're seeing it through a Donaldian lens today. And also on the subject of the president-elect, the Americast team are with Matt Chawley from 3 today to answer your questions about the US election. So you can text in there and you can call in there as well. So that'll be really interesting. Let me take it to David. David in Newport, not so far from Cardiff. Hi, David. Good to have you on the radio. What would you like to say?
I was just thinking that you obviously, just to allude to some of the earlier callers, you don't get to pump stuff into the air for 200 years and there not be any consequences. Regarding Trump, it's just a sort of capitalistic wet dream, really. Trump isn't thinking about anything beyond profits for him and his donors and what have you. It's very short term, and as the previous caller just said, it'll take a long time for anyone else who comes down the line to turn it around. But my main sort of thought was that oil is one thing, which obviously people burn as energy and it gets turned into petrol and whatnot. But what about things like plastics, which seem a lot more deeply embedded in society? And when the oil eventually does run out, what then? Dramatic pause.
Yes, listen, it's a place for dramatic pauses. Dramatic pauses are us. But listen, Donald Trump raised more money from the oil and gas industry from this campaign than any previous campaigns for the US presidency. And there was a surge of fossil fuel funding in the 6 months before he requested $1 billion from oil executives and then promised he would scrap environmental rules if elected and drill, baby, drill. So never mind wheels within wheels. Isn't that the cold reality of politics?
Yeah, it is. It's basically the oil industry doesn't want to stop making the vast profits that it's making. It doesn't really care about what's coming down the line, really. I'm reminded of that, and I don't know who actually said it, but there was a quote about, I think it was a Native American chief who said that we'll realise in the end that we can't eat money.
Well, listen, let me take another call on. This is brilliant. You've had a brilliant call, David, and wow, Justin, likewise. Alex in Newcastle, taking it to another voice. Take it on.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Yeah, to come back to that meeting with Donald Trump, I think it really does show the brazen corruption of the oil and gas, not only in America, but around the world. I mean, we have COP29 coming up in just a week's time, but last year was the first time that fossil fuels were properly mentioned in a COP. They talked about coal only in COP26, and last year was the first time they mentioned oil and gas and how we need to remove oil and gas. This is terrifying considering how many COPs there's been and how many fossil fuel delegates are there. This year, there's going to be 4-6 times as many, I think, fossil fuel delegates as there are Indigenous people.
Isn't it good that they're there, engaging?
No, not at all. It's like putting a fox in charge of the chickens.
But they're not in charge. They're contributing and
They're not contributing. They're lobbying. There's far more fossil fuel lobbyists than there are renewable lobbyists, far more fossil fuel lobbyists than delegates of any other country. It is terrifying how much control they have over this political system.
Aren't they saying, how can we get on board with this and utilise these technologies for our business model in the future? I'm glad you found it amusing.
Nicky,
go on, what?
50 years they have been trying to cover up the climate science. 50 years. ExxonMobil has dramatically accurate climate science predictions since the 1970s, which they did not share, and they've been putting advertising campaign after advertising campaign.
I think about my children.
Not as bad as it
I
is.
think about my grandchildren. I think about my great-grandchildren, and I think it's grim. It's awful. It's a part of it. It's a constant dark cloud over my life since I read the science, since I got my head around this. It's awful. It infects my thoughts in the middle of the night. Why don't they think about their grandchildren?
I don't know. I think they can protect their grandchildren of all the money they're going to make. I think they're more focused on their career than they are about the bigger picture. I think in general humanity is too short-sighted when it comes to big issues like this. But I think that's entirely the reason why we all need to step up and say to these oil and gas people, say to the politicians, this is not acceptable. This is life or death. My kids are going to really suffer unless we all stand up and speak out on this. Are you still there?
Yeah, I told you I like dramatic pauses. I don't want to. Yeah. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Nicky.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Alex. It's coming up to 10 o'clock. We're going to discuss.